That Old Queer, Episode 1 Sappho the Poetess. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the land on which we gather. We are recording this on the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, and work has been done for this project on both Cubby Cubby and Jinnabara land. We pay our respects to their elders, both past, present, and future. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hello and welcome to That Old Queer, a queer history podcast. Each episode we'll be exploring a queer individual from history. My name is Anthony Borsato and I am your host. Joining me today in every episode is my lovely co-host Tayler Gale. Who are we? We're the queers your mother warned you about. A couple of queers who are sick of our history being overlooked, rewritten, erased, or destroyed. Each week I will be taking Tayler through another queer person from history, or a person that we now perceive as a queer person from a modern standpoint. So, pleasantries. How are you?
I'm well. I'm keen to get this underway and see if we can make this work.
I'm really nervous about this. First time recording a podcast.
Same.
So forgive us if we seem a little nervous for the first one.
Just a little.
So, who are we exploring this week? Well, each week we're going to start with a segment called Who They? Or Who They Be.
Who they be?
This segment is where I give a random fact over to Tayler for her to read, and then see if she can guess who it is by the fact that I have given to them. I think I'm going to be trying to stump her with these, just because I think that makes it more fun, and she'll have to guess even if she doesn't know who it is each week.
Oh, God.
So, fact number 1 for the first Who They. If you want to read it out.
Who they? This person was given the name the 10th Muse and the Poetess.
Any clue?
Well, poet, I'm guessing it has to be ancient Muse. Makes it seem Greek.
I can give you another hint.
Sure.
She is pretty much referred to as the mother of all lesbians.
Sappho.
Yes, Sappho the Poetess. So you know a little bit about her?
Like minimal, know a name. That's about where it stops, and the connection with lesbianism.
Cool. So our next segment is going to be called What in the Wiki. Do you want to do a little theme song for What in the Wiki?
Sure. Insert it here.
No, I mean like sing it right now. Invent it. Come on, What in the Wiki?
What in the wiki? Oh.
What in the Wiki is quite simple. Most of us get our information out from Wikipedia. I know it's not technically an academic source, but we're not really an academic podcast. We're not given a bibliography. We're not being graded. We're not funded by any higher education institute. So we're going to go with Wikipedia because they actually do a pretty good job of giving you details about someone in their life. So What in the Wiki is where we, or me, I should say, will read the first segment of someone's Wikipedia page, that sort of introductory paragraph that they always have at the top of a Wikipedia page, just because it gives a good overview of who we are and who we're discussing, because every week we're not going to explore everything that they're about, more their queer identity or how we perceive them as queer now. So, what in the wiki for Sappho the Poetess? Sappho, born 630 BCE and died 570 BCE, was a Archaic Greek poet from the island of Lesbos. Sappho is known for her lyric poetry, written to be sung while accompanied by a lyre. In ancient times, Sappho was widely regarded as one of the greatest lyric poets and was given names such as the 10th Muse and the Poetess. Most of Sappho's poetry is now lost, and what is extant has mostly survived in fragmentary form. Two notable exceptions are the Ode of Aphrodite and the Tithonus poem. As well as lyric poetry, ancient commentators claim that Sappho wrote elegiac and iambic poetry. 3 epigrams attributed to Sappho are extant, but these are actually Hellenistic imitations of Sappho's style. Little is known of Sappho's life. She was from a wealthy family from Lesbos, though her parents' names are uncertain. Ancient sources say that she had 3 brothers, Charasix, Larachos, and Eurydiges. The Suda mentions the names of all three brothers. Two of them, Charasix and Larachis, are mentioned in the brothers' poems discovered in 2014. She was exiled to Sicily around 600 BCE and may have continued to work until around 570. Later legends surrounding Sappho's love for a ferryman Phaon and her death are unreliable. We'll talk about that a bit later. Sappho was a prolific poet, probably composing around 10,000 lines. Her poetry was well known and greatly admired through much of antiquity, and she was among the canon of 9 lyric poets most highly esteemed by scholars of Hellenistic Alexandria. Sappho's poetry is considered extraordinary, and her work continues to influence other writers. Beyond her poetry, she is known as a symbol of love and desire between women, with the English words sapphic and lesbian being derived from her own name and the name of her home island, respectively. Whilst her importance as a poet is confirmed from the earliest time, all interpretations of her work have been coloured and influenced by discussions of her sexuality. So, what are your first thoughts on Sappho the Poetess?
I mean, obviously, mother lesbians, as it's been thrown around.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is and we'll get into it, there are a lot of accounts of her not being a lesbian, which we'll talk about a bit later.
Which obviously people assume all the time, especially when studying in scholars tend to try and hide a lot of
the queerness of her.
Yeah, which is why this exists.
Yeah, which is why we're doing this podcast in the first place, is try to reclaim a little bit of that. Yeah, so what's interesting is that she was so prolific in her time. She wrote 10,000 lines of poetry, which is so much. But for her today, only to have about 650 lines to have survived all that time. A lot of that has been attributed... Well, there's a few things that attribute to that. But some people say that that's partly because she fell out of high society and she fell out of sort of the moral superiority of people to read her poems. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. I've got some interesting facts on that. A lot of ancient authors claim that Sappho primarily wrote love poetry, which I always find very interesting because not a lot of that has survived.
Yeah.
There is actually only, as I said, there's only actually 2 poems, I think, that have survived completely in their unedited form. Yeah. One, which was discovered in 2014, which is about her brothers, which is why in the wiki, there's a lot of information about her brothers there. And the other one is the Ode to Aphrodite, and that poem sits at the centre of the lesbianism that we sort of attribute to her. Have you ever heard of the poem?
No, I haven't.
Well, we'll have a guest later who will be reading it for us, so you'll get a chance to hear it. By modern standards, it's clearly homoerotic by today's standards. There is a lot of sexual imagery there, flowers and stuff like that. But no one actually knows fully whether that was the intended purpose.
Right.
It comes into this idea of poetry as biography. Can you read someone's work as a biography on them? She wrote about Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and it was very clearly sexual imagery by our standards. But can we judge her by reading her poems as biography? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
I mean, it's a bit... Like, I don't even know if you could judge a lot of poets upon their work to be their biography. Obviously, like, some exceptions exist, especially when they're writing fully from experience. Oscar Wilde comes to mind in terms of that. In terms of some of the key points of his poetry, there's definitely autobiography or autobiography. I can't think of the other word. Words. Yeah. But I haven't read a lot of the ancient Greek poems to understand if it all matches up and if that was the style of those poets, or unless they're just going, I have inspiration and they're then that's what I'm going to write.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think modernly we look at poets and a lot of the time they are writing sort of biographical and personal things because
No, I do.
yeah,
But
and when I've
mostly.
written poetry, it's been the same. But by modern standard, I think in poetry we are almost looking for an individual story in poetry, not so much a story about something else. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is Sappho also would have written work on assignment, so people would have paid her to write poems and lyric poetry, especially, which is meant to be performed with music. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. Like we read her poem about her brothers as biography, so why not her ode to Aphrodite as an expression of what we would now call lesbianism. Around the 9th century is when most of her work disappeared, and by the 12th century, hang on, let me just get over the page. By the 12th century, John Trezetz could write that the passage of time has destroyed Sappho and her works. According to rumours, her disappearance of her work was linked to the church's disapproval of her morals.
Which would be tied with a lot of people's works.
Absolutely. This is going to come up all across this podcast, if I'm being honest. This idea that at the centre of a lot of Western society is the church, and the church destroys that on which it doesn't deem moral.
Yeah.
You know, it could very well be that Sappho's work disappeared because of the links to that immorality of being a lesbian and writing about the beauty of women. And I'd have no doubt in it. You look at other things in history that the church has very clearly destroyed.
Or hidden, or like, no, you can't read this, you can't look at this.
Absolutely. It's rampant in our history. And how do we as queer people find ourselves in history if a lot of it has been destroyed?
Yeah.
You know, even in something like the Crusades, so much that depicted homoerotic imagery was destroyed in colonization around the world. It has been destroyed, which is a very sad thought. So, but then again, that's why we're trying to do this podcast, is to bring that back a little bit. But we can't 100% sure say that Sappho's work was destroyed because of the church. It could have just been that her work fell out of popularity, and so it wasn't rewritten or retranslated, because back then it would have to have been hand rewritten and hand translated.
Yeah.
So if there was no need for her work, it may have just easily been fallen out. But there are claims that Sappho's work were burned in Rome and Constantinople. So it goes that Joseph Justus Scaliger claimed that Sappho's work were burned in Rome and Constantinople in 1073 on the orders of Pope Gregory the Seventh. So
he comes up a lot in history.
Cheers, Greg.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's up to debate whether it was the church destroying or the church imposing their morals on art, or whether it just fell out of popularity and wasn't retranslated. And it could have been a combination of both, really. It could have fallen out of popularity because the church said, it might have been an active campaign. It might have just been,
and I'm guessing, like, obviously the church has burnt things before, like we do have records of that, and so it could be like it wasn't retranslated because of the beliefs, like the drilled in beliefs of the church, and what record survived could have been burnt alongside that.
But even closer to our own time, we have cases of the church disapproving of something and sales of it goes down. You even look at something like Oscar Wilde. Sales of his works went down after his arrest and imprisonment, and only kicked back up years after his death. A big problem we have with Sappho, though, is that because she lived so long ago, we don't really know. There are so many different accounts of her life. So just to list a few, I found all of these while doing my research. So we hear of Sappho as a mistress of a finishing school, Sappho as a married woman, Sappho as a whore, Sappho as fat, ugly, and rejected by men, Sappho at the centre of a Thesisa, which is a group of women belonging to a religious cult,
Right.
or at the centre of some other Sapphic community of women, and so on. There are so many different accounts and conflicting stories on Sappho
Yeah.
that it's hard to pinpoint. But a lot of that has been tracked to be given to her posthumously. So, like, there's I'm trying to think of what it was called. There's a classical Athenian comedy where Sappho is characterized as a promiscuous heterosexual woman.
Yeah.
So, was that written because she was known to be a promiscuous woman, or was that written to slander her? I also think it's curious that in that list there is both like schoolmistress and priestess.
Yeah. So obviously she was doing there's like a form of teaching in her life.
Well, we do know that she had women that were close to her.
Yeah.
And that she did sort of have apprentices. But I think schoolmistress and priestess almost come up a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's this whole construction that a woman who loves other women, it can be sort of disavowed as lesbianism and true love if it's around teaching or religion.
Yeah.
That came up in the research. What do you think of that?
I mean, it makes sense, and it's also like how people would prefer to have viewed it over her being a lesbian and homosexual. They would prefer to go, oh no, she's teaching these women, they're under her care, her tutelage, and it's a nicer picture to paint so we could still talk about her without mentioning her other life being that.
Gives excuse to why she would be close to other women and not have a husband because she's a schoolmistress and she's a spinster, not a.
And she's like setting an example of not to be, but this I'm teaching you other things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real way to allow her to have passion for girls, but not for her to have the emotional love.
Yeah.
Or almost let her have the emotional love, but by denying any physical compounds to it.
And more posing it as a parental, like, maternal love. That's what I'm gathering, is like they're trying to pose it as that over like a sexual chemistry. It's like...
Well, it's interesting you bring up that.
Right.
Because Sappho was meant to have had a daughter.
Right.
Named Cleis. Or maybe it's Cleis. I'm not 100% sure on the pronunciation. She is referred to in 2 fragments of her work. But not all scholars accept that she is Sappho's daughter.
Right.
So fragment 132 refers to Cleis as pious, which as well as meaning child, also could refer to a youthful beloved. Sorry, let me re-say that. As well as meaning child, it could also be referred to as youthful beloved in a male homosexual liaison.
Right, yeah.
So there's this discussion whether she used that word deliberately, not to say child, but to refer to this Cleis as a younger lover of hers.
Yeah, which it possibly could be both. Well, not both at the same time, but like it is the option of being her child or a younger lover, or even maybe not her daughter by blood.
Yeah, and I have to say most of my research has pointed to that, her being the daughter, not a lover.
Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting to bring up because at the same time in ancient Greece there would have been liaisons between older men and youthful beloveds, you know, which by our standards is creepy as hell.
Yeah, but that's the most sort of common documented
form of ancient homosexuality
that we have today. And that is, it's a lot, very well documented comparatively to
anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's, like everything with Sappho, is sort of lost to history, but I thought it's a really interesting point of, was this woman Sappho's lover, and somewhere along the lines referred to the translation of it became stuck in child.
Yeah. And obviously scholars trying to paint that picture over anything else.
Yeah. And you also have to remember that academia sort of builds on each other.
Yeah.
With any sort of research, you're meant to find the new. So when you're working on someone else's theories, it's sort of like if 100, not even 100, if thousands of years has said, oh, this is her daughter, and then you come in and go, well, it could actually mean lover, you know, you sort of have to go back to original translations, which makes it an interesting point, which is also happening with the Bible now, you know,
Yeah.
translating the Bible from the original text, not, you know, what was it? Original text to Greek to Latin to English.
Yeah.
It sort of has gone through so many translations that when you go back and actually look at the meanings of these words, it could mean something else.
And
so
it's also like depending on what rhetoric was being publicized along those words at those times too, in both the Bible context and within Sappho's life. Because obviously those two different meanings could have been considered and okay to be considered her as a younger lover or her daughter at different times. And obviously people, well, not so much now, but like the last 50 years would have gone, this is her daughter, by blood or not, this is her daughter, not her lover.
Yeah. And also it comes down to this, Sappho is very rarely recorded as being married.
Yeah.
Or married to a man.
Yeah.
There is only one account of that, and hang on, I want to get the name right. Okay. According to the Suda, which is a Byzantine encyclopedia, Sappho was married to Cercolas of Andos.
Right.
But most people believe that was a joke invented in a comic poem. Cercolas comes from the word Kirkos, a possible meaning of which is penis or prick.
Yep.
Not used as a name anywhere else in the records of this time. And Andros is a well-known, as well as being an island, a Greek island, is also a form of the Greek word ana, which means man. So his name pretty much translates to like penis McPenis from Man Island.
Yeah.
So it's like that's an unfortunate name.
Yeah.
If you did have that.
Yeah. I'd say of like reading that, I would go with it's from a comedy show, and it's going, this is her husband who doesn't live with her, lives from somewhere else, like penis McPenis.
Penis McPenis face.
Yeah.
Or he just came out and the doctor went, geez, that's a big penis.
Yeah.
And it actually got written down as his birth certificate. This is my son penis from the island of Man. That'd be unfortunate.
That would be. But I see that for the Greeks.
Could you imagine how teased you'd be with the name prick at school?
It's almost being like called Richard.
Yeah, it would be. You would not live it down. Especially, I've heard stories of a guy called Richard Head.
Yeah.
An old teacher of mine used to say that she went to school with someone called Richard Head. It feels very like that.
Yeah, off topic, but family friends, their surname's Head, and they were very careful about naming their sons. They had to think of all the possibilities. So it could be a real bloke, but I assume it's more, this is a comedy piece.
Yeah.
And like, this is her man husband who's very clearly a man. Look, his name is Penis.
I would love if it also had come from her. It's like something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you married Sappho? Oh yeah. Just my husband prick. From Man Island. I married a penis from Man Island. I love the men.
Brilliant.
I think it'd be great. But this isn't the only man she's linked to in history. There's another sort of, another tradition suggests that Sappho was in love with a ferryman called Phaon, and that she was so loved up by him that when he died, she jumped off a cliff to kill herself.
Right.
Which, lock up your lesbians. What is it? Bury your lesbians trope was even around apparently back then. But in this retelling, there was this great passion that she had for Phaon, and it leads her to reject her previous life as a lady lover.
I mean, that's also brings in the trope as like, you haven't met the right man yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Everything will be fine once you get a good dicking.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Like, yeah, it's like, oh no, you don't really love women, you just haven't met the right dick yet.
Yeah, it's so disgusting though as well.
Mm.
Like, and I'll put it out there, this was definitely written posthumously for her.
Yeah.
It was written many years after her death.
Mm.
People have wondered where it comes from. Some people think it might be a misreading from a non-biographical poem that she has written that has been now lost.
And it could be actually, instead of the ferryman, it could be actually be the ferryman River Styx.
Yeah, it could have been something like that.
Because like when you first said ferryman, I'm like,
well, when I was reading it as well, I was very much like, oh, the River Styx.
Yeah. I mean, to that, it's also beautiful.
Loving death.
Yeah.
Or loving the, yeah. I like that better than this. But then it's also like she loves the ferryman in the afterlife, so she kills herself.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. That kind of works.
Yeah, like she's on the boat, then she doesn't pay her money to get off.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. But we want to be lesbian.
Yeah, we want her to be lesbian. She's lesbian, okay, guys? But a lot of people actually disagree that this story was created to sort of like assert the fact that Sappho was heterosexual.
Yeah.
She was a good heterosexual girl.
Yeah.
She wasn't a lesbian.
Nah.
How dare you suggest that?
Yeah.
But after the first writing of this, it has appeared in various testimonies.
But it's also it's part of the thing of like the first thing you read is the thing that you believe. So it could be like someone's read this and then like, yeah, no, she was in love with this man, like,
yeah,
but yeah, it's whatever works for them, I guess. But obviously us going through it and trying to find out if she is, or like this is our your interpretation of what it is.
And that being said, a lot of this comes from like a consensus of interpretation on her as well. I mean, there has to be a reason that the term lesbian comes from her. It's not just me reading into her life. It is very clear, you know, that something drew inspiration, that there was something there. That being said, the name lesbian, or the word lesbian, I should say, didn't come around to the late 19th century.
Yeah. And then they've attributed that with Sappho from being from Lesbos.
Yeah,
England.
Lesbos to lesbian. Yeah, so like having it come so far after her death also sort of goes, she didn't coin the term.
No. It's
just that she was so well known up to the 19th century as being a lady lover that they decided to name the whole thing after her.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at other things that get named different, like the Medea complex and Oedipus complex, but this is like different, but like these are the things that in text from ancient times that we now refer to as terms in modern times.
Yeah, gets named after something that's from all that time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, the earliest recording of her being a lesbian came from, like, that Hellenistic period.
Yeah.
The first testimonia explicitly discuss Sappho's homoeroticism, and these have been preserved to this day. The earliest of these fragmentary biography written on papyrus in the late 3rd or early 2nd century BCE. Which states that Sappho was accused by some of being irregular in her ways and a woman lover.
Irregular in her ways. She's queer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we're all described, irregular in our ways.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any other way to sort of talk about it. There's also references to her being slanderously accused, and some of her pupils of being slanderously accused of having sexual relations with some of her pupils, and there are 3 main companions that are sort of being recorded having their reputations tarnished, or having their reputations suffered due to the disgraceful friendship with Sappho. And I've got the names here. Athis, Telesippa, and Megara. something that we do have to say about this, though, is that people critique a lot about people. Something we have to say, as we've sort of been discussing, is that there's a lot of critique about someone's sexuality.
Yeah.
And stating someone's sexuality from
The past.
From the past. And now that we're post-antiquity, we're so far post. I mean, she was, living, what is it now, 2,500 years ago?
Mm.
Is that right?
Close to
BC, before coming, yeah. Close to that. We have to take everything with a grain of salt, I suppose.
Yeah. Because we can't definitively say that she was, but we also can't definitively say that she wasn't.
And I think it doesn't really matter anymore to a degree.
And it's not like being queer is a new thing, like a modern thing.
Yeah.
And I think this is what this podcast is supposed to prove.
That it's not a new thing, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really interesting because even if you look at it from a historical point of view, the ancient Greeks had such a different system of homosexuality, as we were discussing before.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the same concept, and they certainly didn't really have the concept of lesbianism back then.
No.
I think it was around, but it wasn't really discussed, and it wasn't sanctioned the same way that that these homosexual relationships with certain men and younger boys had.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always fun for us to sort of be able to talk about this, because I fully think from my reading is that she probably was at least a bisexual woman, or at least pansexual or something like that we would call modernly, but she was definitely a lover of women.
Yeah. And whether men also fit into that is what we're debating, or what people will debate from that time to now and onwards.
And probably will debate us around it as well. Yeah, it's just so interesting because she's inspired so many homosexuals over the years that,
like, even if she wasn't, she's queer coded, and
absolutely she's been queer coded,
and we've brought it into our history, our rhetoric, going, she's ours.
Yeah, we've claimed her.
She's ours. Leave her alone.
Yeah. So what do you think about her? It also comes back to this idea of school teacher. This idea that she was a school teacher as well as a lesbian. Like even the tellings of her being a lesbian have that attachment to that these students were, disgraced, or that she was having, sexual relations with female students.
Yeah. I would see, like, not that I can't, I'm visualizing her being a teacher is most probably true, because there was very much, especially in that era, it was very much, you had apprentices, you were always passing on skills, and generally had people working with you or for you. So that, I believe, in terms of that, she had apprentices in some some form. And to support her being a lesbian, it's most likely be these people that she has close contact with constantly, which would be her students. She would see them every day. They might all live in the same sort of house. So it is entirely possible.
But again, we're just speculating.
Yeah. Like, we're not from ancient Greece, so we can't go yay or nay.
Yeah.
We can go, yeah, it makes sense.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, I can see it, but
I think it's also really telling that the only links that she has to men, though, have all been sort of given to her posthumously.
Yeah.
That every man that she's been linked to has been written by someone else. That her story, since the time that she died, has always been written and rewritten over and over again by other people. That she was linked to Phaon, that she was linked to this penis from Penis Island.
Yeah.
That it's...
Penis from Man Island.
Penis from Man Island. Such a blokey name.
Yeah.
It's hard. I actually kind of feel a little sad that we don't know the truth about her. And I find it sad that not more of her work survived, because from the understanding of how she is written about,
Yeah.
you know, the documentation of how she was written about is that she was just the greatest.
Yeah. It would have been fantastic to like have her works survive. Like, I mean, same with a lot of classic poets that we don't have poetry from. But like for her to be so well known, her work had to be good.
Yeah. And I also think it's so telling to how all of Western society has treated women as well. We have lots of texts that have survived from that time.
Yeah.
You know, full works from Aristotle and all of that. And I'm not saying for sure that they're around the same time. I don't have the timeline straight in my head. But we have all these ancient texts that have survived all this time. But the great poetry of a woman who was regarded as the 10th muse can be easily lost, sort of. Is it because she was a woman? Most
likely. Come on. Patriarchy's not dead.
Patriarchy's not dead. This is time of the patriarchy.
Yeah. I would put it down to a lot of our loss being with her being a woman, her being a queer woman, and the church's influence.
Yeah.
And just men in power going, yeah, no.
Yeah, nah, love, nah.
Nah.
We can't have you being, you know, a powerful lesbian woman.
Yeah.
We can't have your work surviving.
Yeah.
What was it? Pope Gregory?
Yeah.
God, the things that we have let the popes get away with. I'd actually be really interested to wonder whether in the archives of the Vatican, whether there'd be old works of Sappho down there.
I really, really hope there is.
Not that we'll ever get it.
No. I really hope, like, we say that they've been destroyed, but they've just been hidden away.
Well, you know about the Vatican.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to explain it to people if they don't know about it?
No, you can't.
Okay.
You're the Catholic boy.
So, for like hundreds of years, the Vatican, like, bought things up and hid them away. We talk about them destroying a lot of things. I think a lot of the time it was actually them encouraging other people to destroy a lot of things.
Yeah.
Under the Vatican, there are, you know, catacombs, a museum full of things that they have bought because they are dangerous for the world to see and they don't corroborate the story of the Bible.
Yeah.
So there is these catacombs full of ancient texts that discredit things. They've got Catherine from Russia. I can't remember her name now. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Catherine the Great.
Yes.
Catherine the Great was known to have these really just dirty furniture.
Yeah.
She had like chairs that were covered in dicks and boobs and all this furniture that was just so out there. Like, I think literally there was like a throne made of penises that was just like, there was wood carvings of penises, like full phallics of penises all over it. And the Vatican bought it one day and locked it up underneath because it was considered, you know, taboo and dirty.
I just like hope like Sappho's work remains in there somewhere. Or like someone's got it in a private collection.
And or we're just really lucky in some architectural. No, we'd never find it in architectural dig. It's been too long. The paper would be
gone.
Destroyed.
Yeah, I just like, for our sake, like as queer people, like please be there.
Yeah, just please be there. It'd be interesting to see if they ever release it.
Yeah, doubtful.
Yeah, doubtful.
Not in our lifetime.
No.
Maybe our grandkids.
Maybe. Oh, if we have kids.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that generation.
That brings us to the next point. Each week we will be having, at least for the first few weeks, we will be having an artistic response by a queer artist. So what we have asked them to do, or what I've asked them to do, is to read up on these people and then create an artistic response inspired by them to present to you guys, because I think as a couple of modern queers, we are interpreting these people ourselves, and so to have another queer interpret in a different way would be really interesting for everyone to see. So this week we have Nicole Reily, who is the artistic director of Zen Zenzo Physical Theatre, which is a brilliant company based out of Brisbane, Australia. She will be performing a rendition of Ode to Aphrodite by Sappho. So this is like that main poem we were talking about before. So it will be inserted here.
Aphrodite, subtle of soul and deathless, daughter of God, weaver of wiles, I pray thee, neither with care, dread mistress, nor with anguish, slay thou my spirit. But in pity hasten, come now, if ever from afar of old, when my voice implored thee, thou hast deigned to listen, leaving the golden house of thy father with thy chariot yoked, and with the doves that drew thee, fair and fleet around the dark earth from heaven, dipping vibrant wings down the azure distance through the mid-ether. Very swiftly they came, and thou, gracious vision, leaned with face that smiled in immortal beauty, leaned to me and asked, what misfortune threatened, why I had called thee? What my frenzied heart craved in utter yearning, whomst its wild desire would persuade to passion, what disdainful charms madly worshipped slight thee, who wrongs thee, Sappho? She that fain would fly, she shall quickly follow, she that now rejects, yet with gifts shall woo thee, she that heeds thee not, soon shall love to madness, love thee, the loth one. Come to me now thus, goddess, and release me from distress and pain, and all my distracted heart would seek. Do thou once again fulfilling still be my ally.
Thanks, Nikki, or Nicole, I should say, Nicole Reily. We will probably leave her and the company she works for, details in the description.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts on Sappho before we wrap it up?
Final thoughts. Like, obviously, we know her as the mother of lesbians because that's where you get it from. Incredible poet. Sounds like a badass lady. Would have loved to know her.
Yeah.
Would have loved to be around her. And whether she is queer or not, she is so clearly tied to being queer that, like, we can't deny her that.
I think we should, like, in this podcast, decide whether we think someone's queer or not, because I think sometimes we are going to come across people where we're not sure.
Yeah.
So I think queer. I think probably lesbian.
Yeah.
I would love that to be true for the narrative, especially for all the lesbians in history who have, been so inspired by her and get their identity from her and her name.
Yeah. I'd say queer and a lesbian only because I really hope she is.
Yeah. Badass lesbian poet.
Yeah. With all the girls.
With all the girls.
With all the girls.
Cool.
Yeah.
Before we go, there's a few thank yous we would like to make. We are recording in a studio that has been very kindly provided to us by a great musician called Nyssa Ray. Her details will be below. We would also like to acknowledge and thank the Sunshine Coast Regional Council and Arts Queensland for their support in this project through their Regional Arts Development Fund. They do some great work, or they support some great work regionally, and they were very kind to provide us a bit of money to
get the podcast off the ground and see if we get the concept going and it works for us.
Yeah, so we would really like to thank them.
Yeah.
That is all for the very first episode of That Old Queer podcast. Any thoughts before we go?
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has been.
Yeah, we didn't need to be nervous, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. I think we'll be less nervous for the next one.
Yeah.
Well, that's all. Thank you for joining us, and please come back next time. Oh, we should actually explain before we go that this is both an audio and a visual podcast. If you want to view the visuals, go over to our YouTube, which is That Old Queer Podcast on YouTube. A video version of it will be up. And if you want to listen to it as a podcast, if you found us through YouTube, it'll be where all podcasts are probably found. Hopefully.
We'll get it there
somehow. But yeah, we're really excited to keep going. So hopefully you'll join us for the next one.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Funding was provided for this project through the Regional Arts Development Fund. The Regional Arts Development Fund is a partnership between the Queensland Government and the Sunshine Coast Council to support local arts and culture in regional Queensland. We would like to thank them for their support in the delivery of That Old Queer podcast.